Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I want to talk about anti-white racism because there's some big stuff that's been happening in the news, in case you've missed it. And I think this is a huge story. This is, I think, a culmination of a lot of things everyone's been feeling for the past, 5 or 6 years now. And I think we've reached an inflection point. And if we don't acknowledge what is happening, things aren't going to get better. They're going to get worse. And the core problem is that we aren't acknowledging what's happening. We're not on the same page. We're not having the same conversations. And so this is really bifurcating society. And unfortunately, a lot of this lies on racial lines. And so from the outset, it might seem like this is a race issue, but really, I think this represents a far greater problem in society. So, I jotted down some notes here in Notion. So, I'm going to walk you through some of the things, and we can go from there. So, I want to talk about the killing of Iryna Zarutska in Charlotte. So, this happened back in August 22nd, and we only started hearing about it, over the weekend. The first instance I saw was this video by Carl Benjamin over at Akkad Daily, and this came up. I remember this coming up as I was scrolling on YouTube, and I saw it, and I didn't think anything of it. I think there's been so many violent attacks like this in the UK. Like there was the young girl who was defending herself against a migrant in, I believe, Scotland. And so that was going around the news, and she was wielding like a knife and some stuff. So you've seen a lot of things like that. And because he's based in the UK, I just assumed this was another incident from the UK. So I didn't really pay much attention to it. But then we watched it, and I was like, oh my God. So in case you haven't seen it, you're not aware, the young girl here on the thumbnail, on her phone, she's wearing a t-shirt from a pizza shop and a hat. So she probably she was probably on her way home from a shift at the pizzeria. Her name is Iryna Zarutska. She's 23. And it's believed, I think she was, I'm not sure if this is confirmed. She is Ukrainian. She moved to Charlotte in 2020. So I don't know if it was a result of the conflict, because I think that started shortly after. But regardless, her and her family left Ukraine, came to the United States for all intents and purposes. She qualifies as a refugee, asylum seeker, someone who has left a part of the world that is currently, mired in war and conflict, came to the United States, is working a job, which a lot of people don't seem to want to do anymore, especially younger people, especially young people working at a pizzeria. She just seemed to be doing all the right things, and so for no apparent reason, she got on the train, and sat in front of the man in the red hoodie, who was name is DeCarlos Brown Jr. And you can watch we'll watch some of the footage. I won't watch the whole thing. But he just pulls out a knife and stabs her. And this isn't an isolated incident. This stuff keeps happening. But what makes this story so important is that it was not covered in the news whatsoever. Okay. So Liz Wheeler pulled this and posted it on X. There were almost 6,000 mentions of George Floyd. Almost 1,200 mentions of Trayvon Martin. You had 56 mentions of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and 0 of Iryna Zarutska. And I wanted to fact check this for myself, because I know a lot of times stuff like this can be misconstrued, especially if it's coming from one particular ideological persuasion. So this is largely being covered by conservatives. And so I went to the Wall Street Journal myself, okay? And I pulled the timestamp. So I went on September 8th at 6:10, and the only article with her name on it was from 30 minutes prior. So probably around what, like 5:45? That's when the story was filed. And so this happened on August 22nd, okay? So for almost 3 weeks, no one heard about this. No one unless you were in the Charlotte area following local media, you didn't know this happened. It only started making waves, thanks probably in large part to social media and X, over the weekend, when folks like, Carl Benjamin and others started making commentary on it and posting it and sharing it. And I think the real reason why this is getting so much media attention now is because the Charlotte area transportation system actually released the video footage. So they edited it out, and they released the video footage for all of us to see. So of course the media had to comment on it. I believe they released it on the 7th, maybe. And so people were commenting about it on on X, and then obviously the mainstream media had to respond. But you'll note by the Wall Street Journal screenshot I just showed you, they wait until the end of the day, right? You have people who are working the news desks like 24/7, right? Breaking news people, all that kind of stuff. They would know, right? If there was some sort of George Floyd equivalent that had happened, and it had been, the roles had been reversed, and it had been white on black crime instead of black on white, the media would have been flooded with it. And you know this because we have, the past several years of media receipts to prove this. Stories like Breonna Taylor, everyone knew about that. Michael Brown and Ferguson, everyone knew about that. But I guarantee you, you could ask one of your, if you have a liberal friend, you could ask them, do you know who Iryna Zarutska is? They probably have no idea. They have no idea. And I'll give you an example. So as I was doing like research for this, so there's been several other notable murders that have happened in the past couple of years I do want to call attention to. But one is the murder of Brianna Kupfer. And I honestly didn't even know about this until I was watching probably like Matt Walsh's show yesterday. And her picture came up and I had no idea who she was. This girl was killed back in 2022. She was working at a furniture store in Los Angeles, and this guy, Sean Smith, he was a homeless guy, had a criminal record, and apparently a strong hatred towards women. He was out on the hunt one day, prowling, looking for a woman by herself to kill, and he stumbled into her store. She was the only one working, and he pretended to be a patron, someone who needed customer service, and she probably naively went to help him, and he stabbed her like 46 times, just killed her in cold blood. And I was reading an article before I hopped on, and apparently she felt uneasy about it. She had texted a friend before, like noting, "Hey, there's this creepy person in the store. I don't really feel comfortable." So her gut was telling her like something was wrong, but because of how the current media climate is, we're all being told to deny the reality that is before our eyes. And a lot of times that is a gut reaction, pattern recognition, you know, seeing things that don't make sense. If a homeless guy walks into an upscale furniture store in Los Angeles, like, I'm sorry, it's not racist to ask questions. But the culture has told us, no, this person's a victim. We can't, stereotype them. We can't like assume they're out to do something bad. Like we have to respect them. And so this girl probably grew up in that, right? Early 20 something. She would have been what, 19, 18, 19 when George Floyd happened. So these people who have grown up in this, they're coming of age and becoming young adults, and they aren't aware. And so I think it's this is a big story that no one is, I mean, now people are talking about it, but it's very clear the media didn't even just like ignore it like you saw here with the tabulations Liz Wheeler did and the Wall Street Journal. But even just like look at Axios. Okay, so this is published yesterday by Axios. Again, they're prompted to publish these articles simply because the video footage is out and we're all talking about it. If that footage had not been released, I guarantee you we wouldn't be talking about it, and people like Brianna, her murder still wouldn't be known. Like, did you know she was murdered? Did you know her name? No. You know Breonna Taylor's name. Obviously George Floyd's name. You know Trayvon Martin's name. Did you know her name? No, because it wasn't covered. It wasn't covered in the media. But this headline from Axios puts it in really great perspective. Stabbing video fuels MAGA's crime message. So right from the get-go, the assumption is that we're all, like, everyone who is criticizing the media, for one, is MAGA, and two, we're all obsessed with crime. And yeah, I think people are obsessed with crime, but it's because there's a reason for it. And so it says right in the first paragraph, MAGA influencers are drawing repeated attention to violent attacks to elevate the issue of urban crime and accuse mainstream media of undercovering shocking cases. Yeah, this is absolutely true. Because this girl, you see her, this is a still from her climbing into the car. She's you and I. She was doing nothing different than what you and I do on a daily basis. I've ridden public transit before. I've worked late night jobs. You probably have too. Um, like this is nothing unusual. She was just going home from a day at work and she didn't make it home because why? It's just this crime is so horrific and so bad, and some of the other ones I'll share in a bit are fit the same pattern. And what makes it so striking to me is there's no substance to it. Like, you couldn't even make a Dateline show about this. because there's nothing to explain. There's no backstory. There's no intrigue. There's no drama. You can't make a true crime podcast out of this. There's nothing of substance to this. Like, that's how callous and senseless this murder was. It makes absolutely no sense. The girl, her only crime was sitting in front of him. And a lot of, conservative commentators have made that reference. It's like, okay, well, I wouldn't have let my daughter sit in front of, a black man in a hoodie. And they're frankly right to say that. But again, she's not an American. She's only been in the country for a handful of years. Um, she probably didn't know, you know, especially if she came of age too in the post George Floyd era. She, came to this country, then George Floyd happened, and doesn't know the stereotypes and the history and how to recognize certain patterns. And much the same way, if you and I were to go to Ukraine, we wouldn't know certain things either. Or if, we were to go to any other foreign country, we wouldn't know things. She just probably didn't know. So she just saw the open seat and sat there. I think people who have lived in big cities and taken public transit kind of have a sense of what to look out for. And, maybe it's just me, but whenever I took public transit, I knew there were certain people you just didn't sit by. You kept to yourself. You had situational awareness. You were aware of your surroundings. Um, and you just kept an eye on things. And unfortunately, like, she had her headphones in. She was listening, probably watching something on her phone. I was completely oblivious to the danger she was in. And I feel, I feel for her because that could have been anyone, and it has been. As I'll share in a bit, there's been a lot of similar crimes following this pattern. But what's notable about this particular individual is that he's a repeat offender, and not just like a repeat offender, like, oh, this is second or third crime. He's been arrested 14 times prior to this. So he was incarcerated for armed robbery from 2014 to 2020. And apparently, shortly after, his mom had him evaluated, and it was uncovered that he had schizophrenia. And so he was obviously mentally unwell. But she couldn't handle him. And instead of, you know, like, she couldn't get support from the criminal justice system. She couldn't get support from public health advocates. So she kicked him out. So that's how he became homeless. Some people have noted that he's homeless. Yeah, he was homeless because he was kicked out because he was becoming such a nuisance and a problem for his own family that they couldn't take care of him. In 2024, he had 3 interactions with the Mecklenburg County PD, so that's where Charlotte is located. And then early in January 2025, he had been arrested for placing a false call to 911. So there were multiple times and places where people could have intervened to stop this from happening, but it only came to an end. His crime spree, presumably, has only come to an end now by killing someone. So it's not even just that this girl is an innocent victim, she is literally a human sacrifice for this ideological system where repeat criminal offenders are victims. They are products of the environments they grew up in. They deserve second chances and third chances and 14th chances. That they're just innocent, right? And so she's become the victim of it, and so I think that she's become a symbol of that as well. Let me pull this article up. So his mom says he shouldn't have been in the community. And so the mother of DeCarlos Brown Jr., who was charged in stabbing Iryna Zarutska to death, said her son should not have been freed after he was arrested in January. So that was when he placed the false call. Um, and so, like, so it says Brown's mother, who spoke anonymously with local news, said the system that released her son, despite his criminal record and history of aggressive behavior, was broken and failed. Like, so I think that's important because part of the conversation now is holding parents accountable for the actions of their kids, especially because there's been a rise in youth violence in urban centers. So starting to hold parents accountable, which I think is great. But in this case, she tried. She tried to get her son help the best way she probably knew how to, and she couldn't. And one thing you might not know is that the criminal justice system isn't just for prosecuting people, and a lot of times, especially for poor people, and I'm making an assumption here. I'm assuming she's probably lower on the socioeconomic scale, but the criminal justice system for poor people is really how they get the services and the help they desperately need. So, give you an example. When I was in middle school and in high school, I was participating on something called youth court. I don't know if this is common in other parts of the country, but in the town I grew up in, we had something called youth court. It was an alternative to family court, so it was trial by peers, and it was basically a way to help kids who are on a negative path like kind of give them a way to reflect on their bad behavior so that they wouldn't end up in the actual criminal justice system. And so most of the cases, we dealt with were petty larceny. So kids would go steal like stupid stuff from JCPenney at the mall, and then they would come to youth court, and we would hear their case, and then they would usually get like community service, right? So they weren't going behind bars. There wasn't any record that would follow them anywhere. It was all just kind of play and pretend to like simulate what the legal system would look like and have a consequence for their actions without it actually sticking with them and having a negative impact. So the vast majority of the cases were that, and they were usually petty larceny. But I remember distinctly, I forget how old I was. I probably would have been like a junior or senior in high school, but I remember we got a disorderly conduct, and this stuck with me in my memory because there were so many petty larcenies. This just stood out. But a young boy, he probably would have been maybe 13 or 14. But he had been referred uh, to youth court. And the police weren't involved or anything. It wasn't like they picked him up for committing a crime. His mother had referred him because he was acting out violently at home, damaging their house, just doing things. And so she didn't know what to do. So she knew something had to be done or he was going to like end up in jail. So she referred him to youth court, and I think we tried like the case we were trying him on. I think he chipped paint on a door. It was like something really stupid, but there was disorderly conduct and there were like damages involved, and so the mother wanted the son to have a consequence for his actions. And so I share that because if something like that could happen in a basically a pretend court setting with a bunch of kids, if parents can refer their teenagers to a system to help hold them accountable, I suspect that's probably happening in the actual court system too. Not all people who are, criminals are necessarily caught because they committed a crime against some random person. And in some cases, I do think, mothers like this who recognize that their sons need help, they are calling it in on themselves. They are seeking out ways for the criminal justice system to provide the support for their adult kids, their adult children that they can't get on their own. And for better or for worse, when you're in jail, like you're contained, so you're away from the public. You're not going to cause harm to other people like Iryna Zarutska. You have meals. If you need medical care, you'll have access to medical care. There's all sorts of support, and that's crazy to say, I know, but there's far more support in the prison system for people who are in it than there are for mentally ill homeless people. I mean, that it just is what it is until we have something different. Prison is frankly the best place for a lot of these people. So the mom knew this. The mom tried to get him help, said he should never have been released, and tried to work with the system, but the system failed her because the system and the system being ideologically driven and motivated wanted her son to be innocent and needed him in a pawn in their ideological game. So I think that's really important. And the culture around this too has radically changed since George Floyd, right? Like I think we all distinctly, it feels like such a long time ago, but it really wasn't. But you know, everyone, like you had to have your black square up on your Instagram profile, and people were getting canceled left and right for not doing so. And it became a crime to criticize black people. Obviously, all sorts of new stuff has come to light with George Floyd. Like what we think happened didn't actually happen. Um, there's police officers who are doing their job who are now sitting in jail because they showed up and they did their job and they removed a public nuisance. They weren't out to kill him, obviously, but they were trying to contain and remove a public nuisance from causing further harm to society. I mean, that's what police do. And obviously, not all police are good. There's police that do bad things. But for the most part, I think there a lot of police officers. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to maintain law and order. They're trying to keep bad people from doing bad things to innocent people out in public. But the culture has changed. The culture has changed. It's assumed that all of these people, every single person who is incarcerated, especially a person of color, is innocent, that the criminal justice system is rigged, that police are out to get them. They're out to, not just like send them through the criminal justice system, but in a lot of cases out to kill black people. And so we've seen a change in the culture. And one example of this, I'll pull this up real quick, is that the New York Post uh, put this article up, and this is wild. I'm not surprised. This is wild to me. So apparently, a GoFundMe was published. There was a GoFundMe for this guy. This guy murdered this girl in cold blood. And there was a GoFundMe set up for him. And this is significant because earlier this year, a Give Send Go was set up for Carmelo Anthony, who was the 17-year-old who killed a fellow 17-year-old athlete in Frisco, Texas. And I think that like netted 100,000 or not 100, like $500,000, right? But you had people who gave to that Give Send Go solely out of malice against white people, and they left it in the comments, right? It was very racially motivated. They thought, oh, this poor, future engineer, he's being maligned by the criminal justice system. When video footage has since come forward, and I think his like original defense team dropped him, and I think he filed for a public defendant because he couldn't afford, which is ironic given that they got the Give Send Go, but he couldn't afford to hire a criminal defense attorney. But he's gonna go to prison. Right? He's gonna go to prison. And so this is it right here. Raise funds to stop the injustice against DeCarlos Brown Jr. So, I mean, it got pulled. But there was one donation, which is just absolutely sickening that people are doing that. The media obviously isn't talking about this, and the way they are talking about it, they're framing it as this crazy MAGA conspiracy. Like we're all just upset about crime, and it's part of this larger ideological narrative that's racially motivated, and it's crime. Like black people are always innocent, people of color are always innocent, and white people are the perpetrators. It's part of this whole white guilt narrative. So you can talk about crimes that happen to black people, but you can't talk about crimes that happen to white people. And this is a disservice to everyone, right? Because you obfuscate black on black crime, which is still happening. And you see this in Washington, D.C. If you have seen any videos of people talking about the National Guard in D.C., the locals, the actual local Washingtonians who live in wards 5, 6, 7, and 8, they're thrilled. They are thrilled that the National Guard is there because crime is down. But if you talk to the Karens living in wards 1, 2, 3, and 4, the urban upper class parts of Washington society, of course it's evil. Trump is evil. The National Guard is evil. The same people who said Black Lives Matter in 2020, who bent the knee, who are obsessed with this, they're completely ignorant to the black on black crime that is happening within their own communities. And places like DC, places like Chicago, places like Detroit, places like Charlotte, I'm sure, a lot of this is happening and it isn't covered in the press. But then when white on black crime happens, that's covered, of course, because white people are evil. But then when black on white crime happens, like in this case, it's not covered either. And so all across the board, innocent people are being left out to dry, and I think this is a big deal, because you can't have a functioning society if you don't have a sense of like safety and stability. Like up until this point in time, I lived an hour and a half west of Charlotte for a period of time, and so familiar with Western North Carolina. I went to Charlotte a couple times to see a couple shows, and I considered moving there. Honestly, there was no reason not to, and it seemed like a normal, quiet urban, city in North Carolina seemed fine. But now that I've seen this, I'm starting to think twice about Charlotte. It's like, okay, this is not good. And I think urban cities that have followed this playbook, Chicago, Los Angeles, like everywhere in Denver, or in Colorado, Denver, and the like, it's like, why would I want to visit? Why would I want to visit your city? Why would I want to go there if this could happen? This could have easily been, a tourist. This could have easily been anyone else. Someone, anyone. It just happened to be her. Wrong place, wrong time. But I think we all recognize this. And so you see, when you start seeing what's happening, you think twice about going to these places. And so that has a real consequence, right? And so of course the media doesn't want this to come out because it undermines their narrative. And so they don't want you and I to think about these things. So a couple examples of this. So for the media to cover this, well, let me go back for a second. Okay, so by not covering it, the left, the leftist ideology, I don't even know what to call it anymore. This group of people, that is pushing this anti-white narrative, and this racist ideology, right? For them to acknowledge this in the press and write about it and talk about it would mean put, casting a light or shedding light on the contradictions within their own narrative. So there's a couple that I've jotted down here as an example. So this is a woman. So if you take just the feminist narrative, right? If you just look at it from a feminist perspective, this is a woman who was attacked, right? And any other circumstance, I think the media would be thrilled to talk about this. Oh my gosh, evil woman attacked. But when it's a person of color or a migrant or someone else who plays a role in the larger ideological movement, then we don't talk about it, right? So if a woman was attacked, if this was any other attack and it was a white man attacking a woman, for example, the media would have talked about this. But the fact that the media refuses to talk about a woman being attacked while going about her daily life, in the same vein that these same people will talk about how unsafe it is for women in large cities and how men are evil. A man attacked her, right? A man attacked this woman and killed her. So you can't have men are evil, but then also ignore what happened to her and how she was attacked. And so if they call this into question, like if they call this into question, it undermines the racial narrative, but it affirms the feminist narrative, right? So there's a contradiction there, and then there's the refugee immigrant angle to this, right? So Iryna was Ukrainian. She wasn't even American. I don't know if she has since gotten American citizenship for a period of time she was living here, but she is of Ukrainian descent. So there's this current narrative that, well, all immigrants are great and everyone's an asylum seeker and we should open borders and welcome everyone. Okay, here's not even just an immigrant, but a Ukrainian, right? The same people, they're all pro Ukraine, right? They're going to have the Ukraine flags on their Twitter links and everything. Okay, so we have a woman who checks those boxes, was attacked, and the media is silent on it, right? Because again, you have this contradiction between the racial element and then the refugee migrant piece of it. And you talk about the social justice reform. These people who are spouting out all of these things like, you need to give people second chances. You need to not, stereotype, all this kind of stuff. Okay, well, it clearly failed because this is his 15th offense. Okay, so you had 14 times up until this point to reform him, and you clearly failed. Same with homelessness, right? The folks on the left, they're all about helping the homeless. They're innocent. They're same narrative, right? They're innocent. They're products of their environment. They're mentally ill. They need help. Okay, well, how many millions of dollars has been spent helping homeless people like this man? Okay, clearly it's not working because he's not the only one who has attacked an innocent person in this was in broad daylight, but others have attacked in broad daylight. But you have a homeless person attacking an innocent person, and this is the outcome. Someone dies. So all of these like meta narratives within the broader ideological movement underpinning leftist cultural Marxist ideology, these come into contradiction with the racial narrative. So you can even think of it in terms of a hierarchy. And some people have talked about this. There's like the oppression hierarchy, but you can tell from the media narrative and how they covered this, the hierarchy of importance. So it's clear white versus black is at the top. I mean, it's at the top because you have all these other qualifiers where you could, reasons why you might want to talk about this story, reasons why you might want to highlight it, or reasons that would make sense for the left to talk about it. She was a woman. She was an immigrant. She was from Ukraine. All these things that would make sense for the left to talk about. They're not doing so. And so the best option they have is to just hide this stuff under the rug. And that's why, Brianna Kupfer's, murder wasn't, to my knowledge, wasn't nationally recognized. It wasn't really talked about, or, maybe I missed it. I don't know. You tell me. But this was my first time hearing about this. But I presume it's probably, for these reasons. Like you have to subordinate some of the other narratives to the broader racial narrative. And I think, I think there's a reason for it. I think it's part of a larger, probably like socialist Marxist project to erase all divisions within American society, and a big part of America's story is race. So erasing racial divisions, and that comes with erasing white people. And don't say that lightly. Like, I think that is actually what is the end goal here. Um, because you can't have equality with behavior like this without death and destruction. Like, that's the only means to the end of equality that I think these people are looking for, absent of, all other accountability and reforms to hold these people accountable. And so I think that's kind of what the end game is. The mayor, published a statement on X because they've obviously been getting a ton of flack over this. And the language in this is really interesting to me. So, they recognize that this was a tragic failure by the courts and magistrates. So this was a failure. She says our police officers arrest people only to have them quickly released, which undermines our ability to protect our community and ensure safety. So this isn't just a MAGA talking point. Like, this is being confirmed for everyone. Like, we all know this. We've all experienced it. We've all seen it with our own eyes. And now, obviously because of what has happened, Democratic leadership within, Charlotte and the media are have to catch up. And so they're talking about taking action here. And so one of the things they're going to do is increase the number of patrols who are on their transportation system. So this is notable because in 2020 there was this whole movement to defund the police, right? Everyone wanted to get rid of police budgets, security budgets. Police are evil. Now they're doubling it. So they've tripled the safety and security budget from almost 6 million to 18 million. Like, think about that. So we've gone from defunding the police to radically increasing safety budgets because it's clear defunding the police hasn't worked. Um, and so yeah, I mean, I'm glad like they're recognizing their failures, but I also think some of these people need to be held accountable, and they haven't been accountable. So and until we have accountability, I think stuff like this will still continue to happen. So I want to call out a couple other notable murders that have happened because I think there's a pattern here, and we don't like to overtly admit that the pattern. And I want to call attention to the pattern because I think it's sickening that this stuff continues to be permitted in our society, and we're just like giving it all a pass and letting it happen. And I'm tired of the narrative that every single person who commits a crime like this is a product of their environment. They are, victims, whatever. That's not true. I believe in free will. I believe that, we all have the ability to make choices, and not all of us make good choices, and yeah, we don't start at a level playing field. Everyone starts somewhere different. But within the parameters of your life experience, you can make choices. And there's, some people who choose to succeed. I'm a huge fan of David Goggins. If you don't know who David Goggins is, like, Google him, listen to his audiobooks. It will blow you away. David Goggins is a Navy SEAL. He went through 3 hell weeks. He's an ultra marathon runner. He set the pull-up Guinness World Record. He's a beast. He's a beast. But David Goggins was a black man like any of these men, and that's why I really like his books and things he has to say, because he talks about, he's like, I was running with the wrong crowds in high school. He was playing basketball, kind of starting to get into that culture where he could have gone the route of any of the men I'm about to show you, and he chose differently, right? So he's a great example of someone who grew up in thug culture, understood he was going down that path too, and he made a change. He made a change. He decided this is not the life I'm going to live, and he made a change. So if he can do that, there's no reason why anyone else can't. There's no reason why, kids in the hood, despite not having fathers, despite being around drugs and violence, can't make different decisions, right? So we need to hold these people accountable, and we need to raise the standards in society. So we have more safety and security for everyone else. So like I said, this is Brianna Kupfer, and she was murdered by Sean Smith in 2022. This is another example, which you may or may not have heard about, that this is Christina Spikuza. She was executed, not even just murdered, she was executed. She was an Uber driver in Pittsburgh, and back in 2022, she was driving Uber, so working, just, no different than Brianna. And she was working. She has, I believe, 4 kids and was engaged. She was doing an Uber shift, and she had a dash cam rolling. And a guy got in with a mask, pulled a gun to her head, started threatening her. She's on the camera pleading for her life. They found her body a couple days later with a single bullet wound to the head. So she was literally executed by this man. And again, he had a lengthy criminal history. Of course, everyone's favorite thing from this year that I think has drawn the most attention has been the murder of Austin Metcalf. So if you're not familiar, Carmelo Anthony on the right was a teenager at one high school, and Austin Metcalf on the left was a teenager at another. They were at a track meet, and Carmelo Anthony whipped out a knife. Why he had a knife at a track meet, I think baffles everyone. But he pulled out a knife, and with one single thrust into Austin Metcalf's heart, he killed him. And I believe, to my knowledge, that Austin Metcalf died in the arms of his twin brother. So these are teenagers. They were weeks away from graduation. What's interesting about this that I think is worth calling some attention to is this is the Wikipedia page of Austin Metcalf's killing. And I've heard people talk about the leftist nature of Wikipedia, and I didn't really believe it. And then I read this, and I was like, oh my gosh. Um, so Carmelo Anthony's name, this kid, by the way, like I said before, he got more than $500,000 for a defense fund because the black community, people who believe that racism is systemic and that white people need to be punished, they funded a Give Send Go campaign, $500,000 because they believed he was innocent. So his name is not mentioned anywhere in this. If you do Carmelo, right? So you have the citations at the bottom, right? But not nowhere in the text is his name mentioned. So he's referred to here as a 17-year-old Centennial High School student was arrested for the stabbing and charged with murder. And then here it says the alleged perpetrator was a prominent student and athlete for the track and football team. Prominent, okay? So there's a clip that has been going around of one of his friends who was talking about, like, yeah, he didn't get, he wasn't really violent. He just got into a couple fights every now and then. Like, you can be prominent and have anger issues and get into fights, okay? But they're trying to paint him as this innocent, aspiring engineer when clearly there was something going on. And again, what makes this interesting is this was also caught on video. So they haven't, to my knowledge, released the actual surveillance footage to the public yet. But they did select a handful of journalists in the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex to review it, and it, from what they've reported, it doesn't align with the narrative that Austin had bullied Carmelo and had cajoled him into attacking him. It appears to have been very, very much unprompted. Just Austin went over as the team captain, was like, "Hey, you're in the wrong tent. Please move." And Carmelo, pulled out a knife and stabbed him. So it's not even just women. A lot of these you'll see are women, obviously, but it's not just women. It's teenage boys like this too. And just one final note on the Metcalf family, because this has gotten so much media attention. His family has been swatted, like, I don't even know how many times now. So swatting is when someone essentially calls the police with a false report of violence happening. So, someone being held hostage, for example. And so the SWAT team will come in and they assume someone is being harmed. So they will bust out your door. And this has been happening to streamers on Twitch, but this was happening to Austin Metcalf's family. Like, the poor father is trying to mourn his son's death, and he's being swatted by people who support Carmelo Anthony, who at this point is the evidence seems to suggest it was a completely unprovoked attack. Like I said, Iryna Zarutska, she was 23, murdered by this guy, to Carlos Brown Jr. And like I said before, he had 14 prior arrests and was kicked out of his mother's house. And then the last one that's worth calling attention to, and again, I doubt this would have gotten media attention had it not been for Iryna Zarutska. So over the weekend, this woman, Dr. Julie Schnueli, I think, she was 59. She was walking her dog at a park in Auburn, Alabama, and she was robbed and murdered by Harold Rashad Dabney III, this guy on the right. He also had a criminal record in Virginia and was given leniency on those charges. So I think they were felony charges, and they were reduced to misdemeanor. So what do you see here? Okay, this fits an archetype. This fits a stereotype. It's not even just black men. Okay, it's prior criminal records. Okay, at least two were homeless. So it's clear they might have mental health issues, drug issues, whatever, but they can't function as contributing members of society. Okay, and all their victims were white people, right? And had it not, I don't know. I would be curious if you heard about her, Christina Spicuzza. I don't know if her stuff got national attention outside of the, Western Pennsylvania. Like I said before, I hadn't heard of Brianna. Austin Metcalf did make the rounds, and I think mostly on conservative commentators talked about it, but just because of how brazen it was and the fact that it was teenagers and track meet, like I said before, this was August 22nd, so this has been 3 weeks now, and we're only starting to have this conversation, and the media is only covering it because the video footage was released, and this as well, I suspect, was only um, made public in the press. Stories were written about it simply because of Iryna Zarutska, and you can't ignore it. But you look at these pictures of all the men who commit these acts, and they fit a stereotype. They fit a stereotype. You know, so it's time to call a spade. Like, this is what it is. Um, this is what it looks like, and this is not okay because almost I think I don't think her murder was captured on video, but the rest of them were. There's video evidence of all these. I don't think hers was either, actually. But most of these, there's video footage, eyewitnesses. It was unprovoked. So absolutely nothing. Did absolutely nothing to provoke. I mean, Iryna didn't even talk to the guy. She was just on her phone. Probably doesn't. She probably died not knowing what happened to her. You know, if you think about it, if you put yourself in that situation, she probably like felt a couple jabs, had no idea what was going on, and then shortly thereafter died and had no idea what had even happened to her. It just happened so quickly. So yeah, this is happening. So there's a couple key takeaways I wanted to talk about with this because, like I said, this is a pattern. Like this keeps happening. These are multiple murders that have happened, and they're not necessarily getting the media attention that they deserve. And it's not just because it's it's black on white crime. It's because of these types of crimes. They're unprovoked. You can't make a Dateline series about any of these, right? Because there's not enough substance. Like, there is no reason to get into an Uber and execute your driver, right? They're just completely unprovoked, callous. I've heard some people say that this is evidence there's demonic activity in society, and I'm starting to believe it. I'm starting to believe it because you watch the video footage of the attack, and it's just shocking. It's shocking how it happened so quickly, and like again, it was unprovoked. There was no reason why he needed to attack her. But then everyone else around him, like, they seem to be in trance. So before we dive too deep in, let me pull up the video that I have. Okay, so this is like, I just want to play like a couple seconds of this. Because I think this is really telling of where we are as a society. So you can see Iryna's sitting right here. Her khaki pants are right there. So DeCarlos Brown is on this end and about to stab her. And they've blurred it out and edited it, obviously. So she's probably dead at this point. And you can see there's blood dripping from his knife. But look, he's walking past all these guys. They're just hanging out. One's on his phone. Like, obviously what he did is horrific. But as you watch this too, I keep thinking to myself, like look, like, a woman was just murdered on this train, and these people are just, they don't care. If that were me, like, I would be losing my mind, right? I'd be absolutely terrified. You have a man who just stabbed a woman. He's walking around with a bloody knife on the train, and all these people are just sitting. And this casts the Daniel Petty incident in a completely different light, because he stood up to someone like this and prevented what could have been a similar crime, and he was dragged through the mud because of standing up and being heroic. And no one's gonna want to do that anymore. And you see this here. You see people who are entranced in their phones. They don't care. They're not talking. Like, a woman is dead. A woman is dead on this train at this very moment, and they're just like sitting, going about their business. So yeah, I mean, that's why I think maybe there's some demonic activity going on in this world, because you have a society now where people like this, murderers like this, crazed individuals, are allowed to roam freely. Even his own mother said the criminal justice system had failed him. But then you have bystanders now who like just don't care. Like everyone's just so engrossed in their phones, they don't care that they're just so unaware of what's going on around them. I don't know. Like you tell me, but if I were on that train, I would have been losing my mind. And I experienced something not quite to that extent, but something similar when I lived in DC. I think it was 2015. I want to say 2015 or 2016. But I was going to a 4th of July just get together with some friends in Silver Spring, and I was on a red line train going through Noma on the metro, and I remember because as the train went through Noma, the downtown bound train on the other side of the track was open, and the car doors were all open, and everyone was standing on the platform, so they weren't boarding it. And that was really strange to me. Like you see trains like that all the time, that would just be like parked on the tracks, especially if they were single tracking. But it was weird to have a train and people not be in it. And I didn't know this until later. But there was a guy who was sitting on his phone, and a guy had gotten in and tried to steal his phone, and he like wouldn't give it up. And so the dude who looks like this, your average criminal, got on and stabbed him a bunch of times, and his body was probably like it had just happened. So as my train was going through, his body was probably lying in a pool of blood on that metro car train on the other side of the platform. And so that was really uneasy for me, right? Because why that train, right? I was on the metro. Thousands of other people were on the metro at that same time. It could have easily been my train car, right? It didn't have to be that guy's. And the victim, he was my age, so he's probably some guy in his early 20s. And so it could have easily been me. It could have been easily, I'm sure you probably have similar experiences too, where any of this could have easily been you. And so this changes how not just how we interact with one another, but how we behave in society, and the types of risks we take. Like, I'm not incentivized to take public transit again anytime soon. Not just because of this recent incident, but it's again, there's a pattern of things that go wrong, and why put yourself in undue risk, right? Um, yeah, and so that's kind of where we're at. So I have a few takeaways I wanted to share, just my thoughts on this whole situation. So I think what we're witnessing right now are the consequences of deliberate policy decisions. So this isn't just happenstance. This is an accident. I think ever since George Floyd, and probably before that too, there have been deliberate policies. So DEI, so putting people in charge of public service sectors. So the fire, the police, mayors, prosecutors. Right? You've had all these DEI appointees who aren't competent and can't do their jobs. They're not held accountable. And if what is being said about this is true, by the way, that the judge who let him go might have had a conflict of interest because she was working at an organization that promoted second chances. So I forget which crime it was that he committed, because this guy committed so many. But if it's true that the judge who let him go free was kind of like your typical DEI appointment, and that she was also involved in like reform and that kind of thing, that's a clear indictment on her. But these people aren't being held accountable. And so you've had DEI, you've had these reformers, you've had calls to defund the police, and so all this has been implemented, and now we're paying the consequences of it. And it's not just people who have become human sacrifices. Like, you and I are paying for this. You saw on the mayor's statement that I showed you, they're increasing the tripling the budget of security, right, on the light rail system. So you and I are all one way or another, we're paying for this. We're footing the bill. Our tax dollars are being deployed to make up for all of this. Well, there's no accountability, right? People like the judges that let this guy go all those different times, they're not being held accountable. They still have their jobs, right? They're not seeing jail time. I've heard calls from folks on the right to start holding people accountable by putting them in judges in jail, similar to holding parents accountable for the crimes of their youth. Maybe that's a way we need to go, because judges aren't held accountable. They you don't even have to have a law degree to be a judge. You're just elected. And so you have all these people who are operating in local courts. We don't know who they are, and there's no mechanism to hold them accountable. And then they're the ones who are implementing these policies, right? It's one thing to talk about, Black Lives Matter. It's one thing to talk about all these things. And then it's a different thing when you're in a position where you can start implementing it, where you can make hiring decisions, where you can make funding decisions that turn that ideology into action. And so I think we need to hold elected leaders accountable for the policies they've implemented. So if you're not involved in local politics, that'd be a good time. Like, vote these people out. A lot of people don't participate in local politics, and that's why people like this continue getting into office, and they're allowed to do this stuff because typically conservatives, especially, don't really participate in local politics. So if you are offended by any of this, and you are tired of thuggery, start participating in local politics and hold these people accountable. Because that's the only way things will change. But also, not just that, hold journalists accountable. And I think we hold, like, there's still this esteem that's held to a journalist, and they're part of the intelligentsia. They're seen as respectable. I think we need to stop holding these people, into respectable positions. So this guy with the Axios piece, right? So this guy, Mark Caputo, I don't know who he is. I don't think there's anything commendable about having your byline below that headline. I don't think there's anything commendable. So someone like him ought to be publicly shamed, and professionally shamed. If you are in an industry where you interact with media folks, and this is something that, to the Trump administration's credit, they've done a good job. I think it was funny at first, like, oh, the fake news, blah blah blah, kind of teasing that, and making fun of certain different media personalities like CNN and New York Times and that kind of thing. But I think they had a point in doing so, because they've reduced the honor and the dignity that some of these people have in the eyes of the rest of us. So while the captured left are still going to see these people with esteem, the rest of us are starting to see through it, and you probably may have for much longer than I have, but starting to recognize that, okay, these people aren't the saints of society that they've been made out to be. Like, yeah, the New York Times is fake news because it's not actually, like, this is a news story and it didn't report it, right? So starting to hold these people accountable and not look at them with esteem and respect. Hold them to account. And another thing that's important, and this story in particular really highlights this, is that local media checks the narrative. So our entire local media apparatus has been completely gutted. I think Gannett owns like most like local papers. So it's not even local anymore. It's corporate owned. Obviously newsrooms across the country have closed. And so everything has been centralized. So one of the reasons why, the New York Times and, Wall Street Journal and MSNBC and all these media outlets, why they've been able to maintain their hold on power over the narrative, is because there's no check on that power. One of the reasons why I think this became a national story is because the local media within North Carolina started reporting on it. And obviously, I mean, you have this huge story of a girl being killed in cold blood. And so, had it not been for the media in Charlotte and in North Carolina covering it, I don't even know if we would have nationally. I don't think it would have gotten national coverage. So I think it's important. I think it's important. Obviously, local news is important. Social media has value as well. But I think we need to rebuild the local media infrastructure, and this is a great example why. Because if we don't have an independent local base of news and source of information on the local level, you can't rely on the New York Times to tell you what's happening in your own hometown, right? So this is going to require you and I to bring this back. So that means being paid readers of local news outlets, supporting it with our dollars. And yeah, you can get free news, but maybe that time has come to pass when you start actually paying for it and paying real journalists to do their jobs. But then also, like, if you can write and you want to, like, go start a grassroots publication on something like Substack. I think that's creating an opportunity for independent media to really take off. I'm biased because I write on there, but I think that's an option. So, if you don't support local media, now is a good time to start doing so. And if you are interested in becoming a local media source, something to challenge the corporate narrative that's coming from a lot of Gannett-owned publications, now's the time to do that. Like, there's no better time than the present to do all this stuff. Another takeaway, like, get off your phone in public places. And again, like, I'm not blaming Iryna. I'm not blaming her, right? She was doing what any 20-something would do, right? But I think people need to start being more aware of their surroundings, especially in bigger cities. And you saw that by the number of people who didn't react to someone just being murdered on their train car. It's just astounding to me. Yeah, like, if I ever saw, like, someone acting deranged, walking around with a bloody knife, like, you would want to get away from that person as quickly as possible. Um, and so just the fact that no one freaked out, and the fact that people were just so glued to their phones really tells you where society is at. And if you're glued to your phone, like that's your view of the world. That's how your world is being shaped. So, it's possible. I'm not saying this happened, but it's possible. You could have been in that train car, glued to your phone, completely unaware of what happened, be a consumer of NPR and New York Times, been a potential eyewitness to an event that was then not reported about and not know it because your world is through your phone. So you have no idea what even happened. So I think people need to get off their phones, especially if you're in public, be aware of your surroundings, and be mindful. And I think we need to all step up and be leaders and help raise the moral standards of society. And this might make me sound racist, and I don't care. We need to stop celebrating thuggery and the culture that these men have grown up in, because that's what the left is telling us. They're all products of their environment. So we need to stop celebrating that environment. Stop it. Start shaming single moms who are in the hood, raising welfare, kids on welfare with 5 different baby daddies. We need to stop celebrating that. We need to stop rewarding that behavior. Like, that's not good. Okay. We need to stop rewarding, absent fathers. If these kids are not going to school, like, yeah, you need to send them, get the truancy officer in, intervene early, get them into juvie. Like, you need to hold these people accountable. Part of the problem with these guys is they've grown up, and yeah, they are products of their environment, sure, not necessarily systemic racism, it is what it is. But we've elevated like the culture that comes from it. So people talk highly about gang culture and rap music and hip hop, and like it's this cool awesome thing. No, it's filled with violence and drugs. Okay, so we need to stop it. Stop. If there's academic programs, I know they exist, at universities where you can do deep dives into hip hop culture. Stop. Okay. Maybe it's time to cancel that. Rap music. I can't tell you how many times I've seen, video clips of basic white girls going to rap concerts where you don't even know what the lyrics are. Stop. Let's stop promoting that, because the lyrics and the music and the culture is just not good. Let's stop celebrating baby mamas on food stamps. Like, there's a whole niche on TikTok of women who, again, fit the stereotype, who have all sorts of different baby daddies, not working, playing the system, raising kids, on your and my tax dollars. So we need to stop. We need to stop celebrating this. We need to stop celebrating because it's absolutely disgusting. And we need to shame people for it. And the last thing I would say is, be a racist, be sexist, and be a transphobe. And that's, that comment specifically is with regard to the most recent school shooting in Minnesota, because that person was also had some mental issues. If you've seen coverage of that, which I'm sure you probably have, all sorts of different anti-Semitic writings, anti-Trump writings, stuff written in Cyrillic. All his guns and the magazines all had writings on him, and it's clear this person was not well at all. So I'm not saying like go out and be mean to these people, but if someone is giving you like a vibe and a gut feeling that they're not safe, don't be around them. Don't spend time with them. Like, if you see men like this, yeah, and I'm sorry if it's a stereotype, if you see a black man in a hoodie and you don't feel safe, go to the other side of the sidewalk. Because this is what's happening, right? This is the pattern. So if you don't want to fit the pattern, don't dress like the hat pattern. Don't talk like the pattern. Don't look like the pattern. The same way, I would say the same thing for me, right? If I don't want to be treated like a prostitute, I'm not going to dress like one, right? Okay. So if I don't want to be treated a certain way, I'm not going to talk a certain way. I'm not going to go out to certain locations at a certain point in time. Okay. If I don't want to be treated like a prostitute, I'm not going to, wear revealing clothing and skimpy clothing. And I'm not going to walk around downtown at 2 o'clock in the morning. Right. I don't do that because I'm not a prostitute. Right. So if you don't want to be treated like a thug, don't act like a thug. Don't dress like a thug. Don't talk like a thug. So I think we need to call this out. And I know that's going to sound racist and people are not going to like that. But, I'm really tired of seeing human sacrifices being made for this ideology. And, again, I am biased, right? Because I see myself in this woman, this young woman, because I too had, all sorts of different jobs where, you know, I worked at Starbucks in Washington, D.C., right? And so you had guys like this come in all the time. They were homeless. You had a lot of cab drivers. I worked the late night shift, and that particular location was open, I think, till like 10 or 11, so it was late. You had guys like that all the time come in, right? And so I'm defenseless. I'm defenseless. So, that could have easily been me. That could have easily been me. Um, I've been in Ubers before. So the roles could have been reversed. Instead of me, obviously I haven't driven an Uber, but I could have been in a passenger in an Uber where someone like this was driving, and, hurt me that way. I've been at sporting events, right? With people I don't know. And, sometimes it can get confusing. And so, yeah, you could be at the wrong place, wrong time, and someone just pulls a knife on you. Like I said, I've been on public transit coming home from work. It could have easily been her. I have dogs. We go to the dog park all the time. That easily could have been me. So I see myself in all of these victims because all of this is happening as people are going about their daily lives, right? And so I resonate deeply with them. So this is, I think personal, in a lot of ways for a lot of people. But I think rational people see where this is going. See, if you don't stop this now, we're not going to have a safe society, and you can't have a well functioning society if it's not safe. You won't have an economy. You'll have people that start self segregating, or seeing like the return to land people out in Arkansas, people who are creating a whites only community because of this. They see this crime happening and they're like, nope, we don't want anything. We don't want a part of it. Um, and you'll see, if for what it's worth, like, I, I have compassion for people, right? I have compassion for people in Baltimore and DC and Chicago and all these crime rated places, and I want the best for them, but it's only going to get worse if crime like this continues to happen, because the more people feel unsafe, the more they're going to leave, and that's going to amplify the violence. It's going to amplify all of the negative aspects of living in a city. And because you're seeing this in Baltimore too, where people who otherwise lived in quote unquote safe areas, those areas have now become unsafe. So why would you spend all that money? Why would you rent? Why would you pay property taxes on a place where you feel unsafe? You're not going to. At some point, people are going to start moving, and then you lose their tax dollars. You lose their property, um, property, income tax, property receipts. Like, you lose the funding that you need for the schools and the police force, right? And so that's a slow decline in public services. And just look at Detroit, right? Look at the decline of Detroit over the past few decades, and that's an example of where things are heading. So I think most people don't want to be victims of senseless crimes. I mean, that's obvious. But I think the vast majority of people, white people, we want what's good for everyone else. We're tired of all this racism. We just want competent people and who can do the job. We want people to be held accountable. So we know if we go to a dog park, we're not gonna get murdered, right? Just a sense of safety in day-to-day life. And if those like basic things can't be met, people with the means to do so are going to start leaving. They're going to start leaving areas. They're going to start self-segregating, and I think it's going to only make things worse from here. So those are my thoughts on this. They're kind of a little all over the place, but I think this is a pretty big story, and the fact that it was buried, really tells you what this is all about. And it's really sad when you recognize, if it weren't for X, and it weren't for local media, and it weren't for the Charlotte Area Transit Authority publishing the surveillance video, none of us would know her name. None of us would know this girl even existed. She would become a no one. And when you put yourself in her shoes and you recognize that you could have been her. Like, there's points in time in your life when you've been out late, you've been coming home from work, you've been going about your daily life, and that could have been you. I think that's when it really hits home, for a lot of people. Like, these just senseless acts of violence need to stop, and the pattern of who is committing these, and the fact that the judicial system continues to fail them and put innocent people at risk. I think that is what the core of this is. It's not, racist in nature. It's not everyone hates, this group of people because of the color of their skin. It's because of a culture of violence and acceptance of thuggery. The blind eye the criminal justice system is turning to these group of people, claiming that they're victims. And then the support that they're getting, if that were the case, if they truly were victims, whatever the support they're getting, it's not helping, right? Because they're committing offenses over and over again. And this cycle of violence only ends when someone dies. And I don't think we should continue sending innocent people to slaughter, to be killed as a literal human sacrifice for this ideology. I don't think that's worth it, and it's not good for society in the long run. So thanks for watching. That's what I got for you. And if you like this video, I'd love it if you'd like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.